this week's episode, guys. Today I speak to Shelby, warrior mother to Stryder, and overall advocate for the pediatric cancer world and neuroblastoma awareness. Please stay tuned for part 2 next week and enjoy part 1 right now. Welcome back to the Childhood Cancer Perspective, and thank you all so much for sticking with me as I continue to detail the journey and the perspective of a parent as well as a sibling when our daughter JC was diagnosed with a rare form of brain cancer. Along the way, I've said that the silver lining in all of this is that we get to meet a lot of organizations and a lot of families, a lot of warriors. We get to hear a lot of stories. We see a lot of ups and a lot of downs. But what I am able to do is share those stories out and continue to grow our community. So my next guest is somebody that we actually met through TikTok, and we're able to hear the story of her amazing Warrior Stryder, and we're going to allow her to tell her story of his journey and everything that they've got going on. And so my next guest is Shelby. The floor is yours.
Hi, if you haven't found me on other social media outlets already, I'm Shelby. My son Stryder, he is 5 years old. He was diagnosed with stage 4 high-risk neuroblastoma, January 6, 2022. What led to his diagnosis was it was the week of Christmas, and he had really dialed down his eating and his drinking, and he started to lose weight, and we were like, what's going on? And we thought maybe it was him teasing because he was at that age. And then we decided, okay, he's losing more weight. He's really, really stopping eating and drinking. So we got him in with the pediatrician as soon as we could. It was really hard because it was the holidays. Took him to the pediatrician. The pediatrician then just grilled me, asking me, what's his life like at home? What's your relationship with your husband like? Is there anything traumatic going on? And I'm like, I'm telling you, my child's lost 3 pounds in a week, and you're asking me about his home life? Like, make that make sense. So then he didn't even do a physical exam. He was like, oh, he looks dehydrated. Take him to the hospital. He's failing to thrive. He needs fluids. So we went on to the hospital. One hospital was like, hey, we're really busy with COVID. We don't know if we're going to be able to even get to him and give him fluids. So that's when we decided, okay, we'll take him to the hospital in our hometown. So we did that. We were in their emergency department for probably all day, and most of the night. And so they had drawn some basic labs, and they're like, oh, he's not dehydrated. He doesn't need fluids. We saw the pediatrician maybe once while we were there, and they're like, there's nothing medically wrong with him. He's just being a picky toddler. We're just going to give you some Tylenol, Zofran, send you home. If he doesn't start eating in a couple days, bring him back, and we'll put in a feeding tube. And so, like, that night, he had started eating a little bit here and there. We got him some chicken nuggets on the way home, and he had started eating. So we're like, okay, well, maybe it's a virus. Maybe something else is going on. Well, fast forward a couple days, he had completely stopped eating and drinking. I had to literally get little syringes of Pedialyte and Pediasure and try and get that into him. And Corey was at work, and I was home with Mary, Stryder's little sister, who was 18 months old at the time. And I texted Corey at work because him and I had been talking about it prior. I said, hey, you need to take him to UC Davis, which is our nearest children's hospital. So Corey got home, jammed some food down his throat, and took Stryder up to UC Davis that night. And they actually listened to us. The first set of doctors that actually listened to us. We've already been, to one pediatrician and blown through 2 hospitals. And they did an ultrasound of his abdomen, and that's when they decided, okay, we're going to do a CT because we see something. And I woke up January 3rd to a message from Corey in the middle of the night saying, okay, they found that he has masses all throughout his abdomen, and there is no doubt in their mind that this is cancer. And our world just stopped. Like, that morning, I woke up to those messages. I'm alone with my daughter. Luckily, my mom and my grandma were here with me. And your whole world just stops. And so then after that, I'm making phone calls. I'm letting Corey sleep a little because I know it was a late night for him. Making phone calls, letting everybody know what's going on. And we wouldn't have an official diagnosis until days later, because after that they'd have to go through and do biopsies, and they'd have to do more scans, and we'd have to wait for all these things to result. And And so I knew childhood cancer existed. So before Stryder was diagnosed, I followed other families. I followed Eliza. I followed Tessa. I followed Jocelyn. I knew childhood cancer was a problem, but I never thought it could be me until it was. And so when we eventually got the news that it was stage 4 high risk neuroblastoma on January 6th, I had known what neuroblastoma was because months prior, my niece's best friend also had stage 4 high risk neuroblastoma. So it was like one of the biggest slaps in the face ever. And they're like, it's so rare, it's so rare. And I said, oh, that's really prime, because if it's so rare, then how do I know this other family that has had 2 daughters with this disease? And so now I've made it my mission to, when I find out that other families are newly diagnosed or going through something similar, to show up and be there for them, because I didn't have that person. I was alone. The only person I had was my husband and my family. I didn't know what we were about to go through or deal with. It was a whirlwind. But luckily now, he did 5 rounds of induction chemotherapy, a 7.5-hour abdominal surgery. He had to do 4 rounds of chemoimmunotherapy before we could do high-dose chemo and stem cell transplant. We did 12 rounds of radiation and 3 rounds of immunotherapy with isotretinoin. And then after that, his disease progressed. He did another 2 rounds of chemoimmunotherapy, and that did nothing for him. And then we had to do what's called MIBG therapy, where he is literally isolated in a room and radioactive, and he has to be in there alone by himself, and we have to talk to him through a screen. And so now, after that, thank goodness, as of December 20th of this last year, his scans have been stable, and he just had a scan this past Friday, and he is still stable, thank goodness, and is now on a clinical trial for maintenance treatment and doing DFMO, and he just finished up oral etoposide on the 15th. But it's like, after all of that, you sit back and you're like, was this real life? How did we get here? And you see all of the trauma and the side effects that your child is going through, and you're sitting back and you're like, how do I process this? How do I deal with this? While some of your other friends are still with their children battling. And with neuroblastoma, it's a 50-50. You either win this battle or you lose this battle. And even if you beat this, it's a 60% relapse rate. But it's like, now we're trying to find this new normal now that we're past all the big scary stuff. And it's like, where do you go from here? You can't go back to the normal that was before.
Right. No, there's what you are living now is the normal that unfortunately has been created for you, and that you fall ass backwards into. And there's no going back, and this is what your life is moving forward. And I hate calling it unfortunate side effects, but it's what it is, because everything that happens now moving forward, a bruise, a headache, a cold, it's not the same as it was before that diagnosis day. And so that's one of those things to get people to realize that, oh, well, he's done with treatment. He rang the bell. You guys are good now. So we probably, we can just back up the support train and just leave you all to yourselves, and everything's good from now on, right? And that's the understanding on the outside, right?
And that's the thing. So like, everyone's like, okay, so he's stable and he's doing great. And he gets to ring the bell on the 11th of June. And I'm like, that doesn't stop his care. We still have monthly clinic visits. We still got scans every 3 months. He's got issues with his hearing. His pancreas does not work properly. He's going to have to take enzyme replacements for the rest of his life just to keep his body functioning properly. Yes, there could be worse issues to deal with, but, even so, he's 5 years old. He doesn't take anything by mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how is that going to look when he's going to school, when he wants to go on field trips, or when he wants to go on sleepovers with his friends? And it's still dealing with all of the trauma that not only he has seen and dealt with, but the things that Mary has seen and dealt with, because this has been her reality since she was 18 months old, and she's going to be 4 now. And, per his initial diagnosis, we had this whole group of people who would call and text and message, and they were there in the beginning. And then after the initial car crash, because that's what I call it, it dissipated over time. People I thought who were going to be there for forever just kind of dwindled off into the abyss, and they left. And I'm like, okay, where'd you go? Why? What did I do?
When we go through, something that's extremely tragic or emotional or anything like that, that's a spectacle. If that's, we'll just call it that. And this massive dump comes when it talks about, okay, you've got a diagnosis like this that is horrible. Well, you've got one side of the fence of people that say, well, they're kids, they're young, they'll bounce back. There's no need to, no need to worry. And then there's the other people that want to be right there. They want to be at your doorstep, and they want to help you, and they want to be your best friend in your back pocket. But whether the treatment ends or your child passes, at that moment when they feel like, well, we've done all we can, well, then they just leave. And the support in the reality is whether or not your child rings the bell or they pass away. At that moment, I think the support needs to grow, because at that point, now we're recovering from everything that we went through, from everything that they went through, because it's a true family diagnosis, and you mentioned Mary, you mentioned the siblings. I have 2 older daughters, and they went through it too with JC, and they saw everything. They saw the sickness, they saw the weight loss, the hair loss. They saw the bad stuff that we don't see on the commercials. They saw all of that. They lived it. That's their life. And how they choose to deal with it moving forward is kind of on them. Both of my daughters deal with it differently, completely 180 from each other. And I'm sure, Mary will have her own way of dealing with how she moves forward with this as she gets older. But it's a family diagnosis.
Yeah. And, it takes a toll on the relationship with people you have around you, but it also takes a toll on the relationship with your spouse, your significant other. That was another hard thing to deal with, because now we're balancing treatment and home life. And Corey did every single inpatient stay, every single night. I stayed the night in the hospital one night, and that was the night of Stryder's resection surgery. And my mom stayed with Mary. But every other admission, Corey was there at the hospital every night, taking the time off work, you know. And when he would get discharged, Corey would go straight back to work because we had to make ends meet. And it got to a point where we were just in this never ending cycle of, okay, hospital, home, recover, hospital, home, recover. And there was no conversation between him and I. And we didn't express our feelings to each other. And that was hard. And it took a toll. And there were times when I'm like, we're not going to survive this. Like, I don't know how we're going to get through this. And somehow, thank God, we did. And we managed to find each other again at some point once we finally got into a good groove. And we were so used to this after doing this for so long. But it's hard. You have to remember to communicate. And it's hard when one person's trying to protect the other from things. Hey, buddy.
It's the infamous 80-20 rule within this community. And that bigger number is not the fun one. That bigger number represents the amount of couples, the percentage of couples that will break up, families that will break up over a diagnosis like this. And it's important to remember that it's not because you fall out of love with that person or things like that. It is the stress is just insurmountable that is put on a couple, put on a family going through this. I did the same. I did all the inpatient stays with JC. My wife stayed home with my other 2 girls. And, we also were in the heart of COVID when she was diagnosed, so we couldn't be there together for most of the stuff. And beyond beyond that, you're tired, you're burnt at both ends, you're beyond exhausted. And that takes a toll. And I don't think we often realize it until it gets to be too late, how bad the situation has gotten. And I did an episode like this with my wife at one point, and I asked her, I said, did you ever think that we were going to break up? And she said, yeah. And she never told me that before that point. And it was, you don't realize what it's doing to you internally and mentally before it gets to a point that you become part of that 80%. So, I think that got to a point that I was going to ask about later on. But yeah, that 80-20 is a serious situation. And I've met people on social media whose this diagnosis has broke the families up.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm so thankful that, we were able to finally find a good balance and a good way to communicate. But, you know, people outside of this don't realize that this is an entire family affair. There were times when Stryder was in transplant. We were away from home. We were in San Francisco for 3 months. And Mary hadn't seen her brother in almost a month at this point. And she knew I was going to walk over to the hospital. My mom was at family house with us. She was in her stroller, and she knew I was going to go and walk over to the hospital to trade off with Corey. And she wanted to go with. I said, no, you can't come with. You can't come in the hospital. That's the rules. I'm sorry. She got so upset, and she goes, I want you to get my bubby out of that hospital right now. And she was screaming at me, crying at the top of her lungs. And that broke me. Having my 2-year-old child completely lose it on me, tell me I need to go get her brother and bring him back to family house right now. And I hadn't realized that it had affected her that deeply. And even now, there are times when, just recently, a couple weeks ago, she had gotten out of the tub and Stryder was staring at her belly, and then he lifted his shirt and he pointed at his belly button, and then he pointed at hers, and she goes, Mom, why is his belly like that? I said, well, your brother had to have surgery. She goes, why do you have to have surgery? I was like, because the doctors had to go in and take all the ickies in his tummy because he had ickies in his tummy. And then she was asking me why he had ickies in his tummy. And I didn't have an answer for her. It's like, how do you explain these things to small children?
Well, there's no, and maybe there's books written, but books usually are written by people that are not experiencing the current situations, and they're writing it from the outside. And there is no right or wrong way to do it, and there's no easy way to do it, especially with younger children. I mean, I don't want to say I was lucky, but lucky enough to have older children that could understand. But at the same time, these kids, even at 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, understand so much more once they're immersed in this world than we give them credit for. Much like us parents understand a hell of a lot more than people give us credit for. And they don't understand that we research and we look into this and we live this every day. And much like I've said in the past, we don't get to turn it off and go home. We don't get to clock out at the end of the day. This is our life. This is what we did not sign up for. And people wonder, how do we do it every day? We were not given a choice.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, now, as compared to what my old hobbies used to be, I spend my days researching and looking at studies of the just in case. What if something happens? What if it comes back? Because that's forever going to live in the back of my brain. He's still got that one spot. What if that one spot gets mad one day and just blows up? So it's like, it never turns off. Even now, he still requires around-the-clock care between flushing his Broviac every day, doing his feeds every hour, 8 to 10 hours a day, making sure he's getting his morning meds, his evening meds, making sure that everything is going smoothly, and making sure that we get the labs done in a timely manner, and his weekly dressing changes, and scheduling infusions and appointments with GI and appointments with speech therapy and occupational therapy. And now, we're getting ready to transition him back to a pediatrician and getting all that lined up. And I know he's going to have a buttload of dental work after this, because chemotherapy did a number on this kid's mouth, on top of all of the vomiting, because the chemos that he got were so bad. He had terrible nausea virtually the entire time. And even with some of the heaviest medications, and he was on pretty much every anti-nausea med under the sun, it didn't touch his nausea. Period.
It's hard. It's hard for me to even listen to this, knowing and understanding it 100%, being in that same position and knowing exactly what our daughter went through, and watching. And listen, we've been a part of watching Stryder go through this, the same, you know what I mean? And to see it every single day and hear about it every single day, it's hard to believe that there's so many that just don't want to believe that it's a real thing, a real problem. And what you did right there is you named off about an 80-hour work week in about 10 minutes that you have to put in, whereas that's where I'm getting at, that these doctors get to clock out and go home at the end of the day. They have a patient, they deal with it, and they go home. You're the one, as the parent, carrying the load as the caregiver, but you're not making the paycheck, and all you're doing is hoping to save your child's life at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And and then we talk about the side effects, right? The hearing loss, the hair loss, your teeth are destroyed, your liver, your lungs, your heart. You're given this gift of chemotherapy, this gift of treatment, right? And it's supposed to save you and make everything better, but the side effects are often so much worse than what they were going through when the diagnosis came.
Yeah, because while he was in transplant, he had thiotepa. We had to wake him up in the middle of the night, do the baths every few hours for, I want to say, like a week straight.
Yep.
It was bad because we were trying to avoid his skin pretty much melting off of his body. Mm-hmm. And then he got carboplatin, melphalan. There's a whole laundry list of high-dose chemos that he got. And he got mucositis so bad that his entire face swelled up. He had diaper rash like you would never, ever imagine to see. It was just horrible. And I'm sitting here and I'm watching all of this, and I'm like, all of this just to try, not even guarantee, to try and save my child's life. And then with his second transplant, he ended up developing a complication, veno-occlusive disease, to where it affects the liver. And he was on a liver medication from September of 2022 up to January of 2024 because of all of the issues with the chemo. And even now, with the DFMO, it makes his liver mad. But there's nothing I can do about it because he needs this medication that is supposed to help him not relapse. But again, even with that, it's not a guarantee. It's a trial. It's a maybe. Because yet again, there's not enough research for better drugs that are more effective and safer. And even with the DFMO, it can cause more hearing loss temporarily, so it will come back. But he's going to be on this drug until 2026.
Yeah, I just don't even know how to describe to people in a more intense detail about what chemotherapy and what these trials or what they do to you as a tiny human. What they do to us, what we can handle is so much different than what these children can handle. Yeah, they're young, their bodies, may be able to bounce back in a way that we may not now at 40, 50 years old. Okay, we creak and your knees sound like Velcro when you stand up. But these kids, their bodies are not meant for this poison that is going into them. And listen, we did thiotepa as well. And, the best part about that, the soap smells amazing. But to tell you that side effect when they come in and say, now listen, we have to do these baths every couple of hours. You got to get them up. Jace hated it. She hated getting woken up to get put in this bath, to just sit there long enough to make sure that your skin's not going to burn off. And then they make sure to tell you, make sure you don't touch it with your hands. Make sure you don't get anything on you. They come in and it looks like the day after tomorrow when they come in to administer this chemo. And they've got 7 layers of PPE on. And they want to make sure that you're okay. You don't touch them. You don't get anything on you. You don't, make if they throw up, don't get it. Make sure you're cleaning it up with gloves on. I honestly, at that point, I never took care to make sure I didn't touch her body or her skin or anything. I didn't care. It's going into her body. The only thing I care about is, why does it do that much damage? And you're worried about whether or not I get a small burn on my hand. I could have given a shit.
Well, and that was me, because they were like, well, you need to be wearing a chemo gown and you need to be covering your arms and make sure you're wearing gloves. And I'm like, he wants to give me hugs. He wants to give me kisses. He doesn't like the feel of it. I don't care. I'm wearing long sleeves. I'll be fine. I can go and take a shower when I go back. I'm like, and I'm not going to kiss my kid wearing a mask. Like, if I want to kiss my kid and he's got chemo seeping through his pores, it is what it is. I'll be fine. I'm an adult. I can handle myself. Right. And then as a woman, they're like, well, because you're still of childbearing years, I'm like, pump the brakes. You don't have to worry about that with me. Just let me be with my child, not covered in all this uncomfortable stuff that he doesn't like, and that scares him when I have to put it on.
Yeah. And then, there's, and it goes the same for, for x-rays and the quick x-rays when they come to the rooms, right? They made me leave. They made me get up and leave the room and all of that for safety. Or if they took her in to do a different scan, I have to put on the 7 layers of armor to protect myself while she's getting these scans going through. Like, as parents, we don't care. Okay. We just want to make sure our kids are okay. And to be honest, I think every single one of us can agree that we've all said, if we could take it away and give it to ourselves and take it away from them, we would do it. So we don't care about a little bit of radiation, a little bit of chemo getting on us, a little bit of X-ray beams coming. We don't give a shit. We don't.
No. The amount of times that I have had chemo, puke, and pee and other bodily fluids on me is outrageous. But it's just because I don't care. I had to be there for my kid. I don't have time to be putting on 2 pairs of gloves on each hand, the chemo gown, the booties, all of it. I didn't have time for that. I needed to show up and be there for him. And, yep. Then you sit down and you talk to the doctors and, you ask them all these questions about, okay, well, if this doesn't work, what do we do next in place of, what you had originally planned? And sometimes, unfortunately, the doctors are like, well, we know that there's this out there, but we're not familiar with it. So we don't know if we want to do that. And that's when I was like, because we had that experience with our doctor. I had brought up DFMO to him multiple times. He was like, oh, I don't even know what it is. I'm the one that had to tell him because it wasn't being trialed at Stryder's home hospital. And so it didn't even come into play until after we had been at UCSF and done his MIBG therapy, and they brought it to our attention. And so once he got on that trial out of Oakland, his oncologist at Davis is now learning from him. And I'm like, thank goodness, because throughout this entire thing, UCSF and Davis had asked permission. Can we take blood samples? Can we take samples of his tissue? Can we take samples of his DNA? Can we take samples of his stem cells to put forth into further research down the line to try and help create further treatments for other kids? Absolutely, 5,000%. If I can help to do anything in further research that you're doing by just using something you already have instead of it becoming a biohazard trash, go for it.
Yeah. And that is so important to understand, that a lot of it, and that's something that I've talked about very little, that we're trying to work on here, is that those types of samples end up, like JC's samples from 2020 are still sitting in storage. at the hospital in Milwaukee where she was treated. And I didn't even know this. They weren't taken out for testing. They weren't taken out for any type of research, anything like that. These samples are just sitting there. So there's going to be some families and some parents that are not going to want that to happen. But I imagine that if given the opportunity, we're all going to say, hell yes, find a reason to help. If you can use this to help somebody else, because when we go through this, and you mentioned this before, when we were diagnosed, it's the same thing with you guys. You were alone. You're not part of a community that understands what you're going through. Who do you turn to? Who do you ask questions to? Who do you lean on? Who do you really reach out and say, hey, what do I do? What am I supposed to do now? You're a deer in headlights at that point, in shock, not understanding what to do. But when you get a little bit into this, about 5 minutes, and you're like, yes, we want to help other people because we don't want anybody else to go through this and feel what we felt on a daily basis and have those images that are in our brains and our minds that we see every single day. We don't want anybody else to feel that. So that research is so important, and it's definitely not happening enough. I mean, I've had the ability to be able to see that it is happening in places because, I found doctors. There's, one here in UW that is doing specific research on neuroblastoma, which is awesome. And he has some great ideas, and their scientists have great ideas. And I hope that comes to fruition and they can make some amazing efforts forward. But it's definitely lacking.
Oh yeah, and the hard part with neuroblastoma, and not a lot of people know unless you are a neuroblastoma parent, is there are so many different factors when it comes to neuroblastoma and how it's treated. That's why I think they're having such a problem finding something that could be universally used. Because, so for instance, Stryder, he doesn't have the MYCN gene, which is their amplification, not gene, and he doesn't have the ALK positive gene. So, those are all good things. They do a full chromosomal breakdown because with neuroblastoma, there are certain deletions and additions that they look into to determine, overall outcome. And they use that alongside the original tissue biopsy, which at the time, Stryder's uh, histology was unfavorable, and his disease burden was so bad. So you have what's called a Curie score. The highest you can have is a 30, and they break it down into 10 segments of the body. The highest score you can get for each segment of the body is a 3. So Stryder's Curie score originally was a 24 out of 30. So head to toe, bone marrow involvement, the whole 9. And the tumor load in his abdomen was so bad, they could not differentiate between anything. They never even discovered what his primary tumor was because they were so clumped and smashed together that they couldn't figure out which was what and where it started. And there's other neuroblastomas. You've got CNS neuroblastomas, which that involves the spinal fluid, and it's a very, very tough thing to treat. You've got ganglioneuroblastomas. You've got neuroblastomas that have the MYCN gene, such as Everly's, and unfortunately, as you know, Everly was brought home on hospice over the weekend, not even last week. And all of these things, it's so hard because as a neuroblastoma parent, my first instinct, once we got the official diagnosis and I didn't know anybody, I got on social media and I started looking for anybody who could give me any kind of semblance of hope or advice or knowledge as to what their experience was with this. And luckily I found Mariah, I found Tony, I found Krista, and I was able to talk to them and ask them 1,000,001 questions. And even throughout Stryder's journey, I would still come to them and be like, hey, have you done this? What was your experience? How did Savannah do? How did Riley do? How did Paisley do? But it's like having those people there to bounce ideas off of and ask questions was huge for me, because then I went into our treatments with Stryder with more knowledge than what the doctor had given me. And so it prepared me for, especially transplant. When Stryder started to show signs of VOD, I kept pushing. the doctors to test him. He's not showing traditional signs of it. His liver's not enlarged. And then Thanksgiving Day, oh, he's got VOD. And it's because I pushed so hard for them to keep looking, keep checking, because they were only doing the labs every 4 days. And I think he did so well with it because we pushed so hard for them to keep looking just in case. But it's like I had told my nurse coordinator, Lorinda, recently, I said, how do we go about setting something up in the hospital, some form of a network to set up families with a family who's been doing this for a little while, who they can come to and ask questions? Because having that would be very beneficial for people. And if they don't want to, that's fine too. Because then they'll have somebody to rely on.
Well, that is a huge it's a huge undertaking to put together a group like that or a network, but it's so important and it's such a vital piece of what we're missing right now. I mean, I did some mentoring for one family that was just recently diagnosed, with a brain tumor, and he was able to kind of talk to them and not give advice, but just kind of listen and give our experiences and what how to deal with things or how to move forward, and just kind of give maybe hope and just but give that shoulder to lean on or that ear to listen to. Social media is it's both a curse and a blessing, and it's definitely something that has allowed, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's allowed a lot of families to come together and to share these ideas or share these stories and become part of a bigger community that can get answers or can just be there to support each other. And that is something that is vastly missing, and it's because this community is a lot of times and for most of the days just put in the dark. And if you close your eyes and turn around, then we don't exist. We're not here because you are told and it is pumped down your throat every single day that pediatric cancer is rare. Pediatric cancer it doesn't affect enough people to be something that needs to be a social outcry. But yet it is the pandemic of all pandemics. It is the epidemic that is taking away way too many of our children way too young. And whatever children it's leaving behind, it's leaving them with lifelong issues that they will have to face and they will have to battle every single day because the treatments suck.
Oh, yeah. And when Stryder diagnosed, they sat down, they said, oh, neuroblastoma is so rare, only 700 to 800 kids are diagnosed a year. But then literally, we had my next door neighbor came to me before we left for transplant. She said, hey, my friend, they found a tumor in her son's brain, and they don't know what kind of cancer it is. Can you just message her and let her know she's not alone? I said, yeah, of course. Within a matter of days, I'd been talking to this mom, again, neuroblastoma. And I'm like, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy because my next door neighbor, and my son also has neuroblastoma. And then a couple months down the line, another parent comes into that hospital that she was at, and her daughter, Everly, diagnosed neuroblastoma again. And then a few months later, another kid, his name is Maddox, neuroblastoma again. So all within 16 months of each other, 4 kids in the Central Valley in California are diagnosed with neuroblastoma. And you want to tell me that in the United States alone, only 700 to 800 kids alone are diagnosed with neuroblastoma, but yet there's 4 of them within a 2.5-hour radius of each other? Make it make sense.
Well, you said a key word though. You said only. There's only 700 to 800. You know what I mean? There's only 30 children a year that are diagnosed with JC's cancer. There's only, right? So that to me, what that says is that our government, our country, our world thinks that that's an acceptable loss. Like that's okay to have that many diagnosed, because out of a population of 80 million kids, that's not a big deal. We can deal with the loss of 70. We can deal with the loss of the 1,800 kids every year. That's fine because we've got 80 million of them.
And that's the thing that gets me is, politicians want to sit back and they want to talk about, oh, we need to protect our kids. We need to do better for the kids. We need to, do this for the kids as their talking point to get elected. But then when it comes time to actually show up and do something productive for the kids, they're like, oh, no, we've got foreign policies to do. We've got budgets. We've got to send money across the pond, send them billions and billions of dollars that we don't have. But our kids here at home don't matter. That's not our problem because it's not my kid.
Yeah. No, politicians fight. Politicians fight for issues they created. Pediatric cancer was not something that we created. It happens. And for kids, it is 99.9% of the time shitty luck. It's not environmental. It's not what you eat. It's not where you sleep. It's not where you went to school. It's shitty luck. It's gene mutations. It's not even genetic for the most part. They just happen and they don't understand it. Pediatric cancer is not understood. That's the biggest thing, is that people don't realize that while you can associate a liver cancer or a lung cancer in an adult with something that their lifestyle has created, maybe not all the time, but it's something their lifestyle has created, or even a genetic factor that has, genetics in females and genetics in males can cause certain types of cancers throughout family lines. For kids, none of it makes sense. There's no rhyme or reason to it. And so we didn't create these problems. These problems are something that need to be taken care of. And when you mention, like, they're out there fighting for foreign policies, they're out there fighting for, what fucking bathroom to use. These are problems you've created. You have ushered in people to make these complaints, and you've decided to, follow it because it's the best thing. It's clickbait. Clickbait's a fun word because we've been using that lately on social media, and it's been working. It's been working, right? It gets people all fired up and upset.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter where you stand. You don't even have to tell anybody, and it's so incredible.
Literally just sitting there and with a picture, and people lose their minds. But yet, we'll have facts up there about how many kids are diagnosed a day, how many kids die a year, the side effects, the long-term health issues. Okay. And people don't bat an eye because they can turn around and run and say, okay, well, it's not my problem. It's not my kid.
Yep.
But it's not your kid until it is.
Mm-hmm. That is such an important thing for people to understand and listen to and put it into your brain, tattoo it on your forehead. Neither one of us were cancer parents until the day that we were. And neither one of us thought that we would be the families that were part of the kids that are part of that group on that commercial. Neither one of us thought that. Neither one of us thought the worst when our kids' symptoms were cast aside by doctors day after day, month after month, when we knew something was wrong. Neither one of us thought that's where it was going to lead.
Yeah.
And it can be you in a second, in a moment. It doesn't matter. Okay, listen, I'll piss people off by saying, when it comes to the diet, yes, diet can have a factor in how your life moves forward, how you live, how you grow, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely it can. But it doesn't have a factor when it comes to this type of thing to the mass that you think that it does. And always being given the unsolicited advice to us that we get all the time. Well, if you would have fed your kid this, or if you would have done this, or you wouldn't have, the vaccine being thrown out there, if you didn't get them vaccinated as kids, all of this, well, they probably wouldn't have had cancer. It's your fault. Or our famous friend that we had a year ago that told my daughter, JC's sister, that it was because she put food coloring in her mac and cheese one time and made it a different color. That was what gave her cancer. That was an exciting time.
Yeah. Meanwhile, literally from the moment he was born, I nursed him. And then when we swapped over to purees and solid, I had the little steamer that I pureed all of his foods out of fresh vegetables. And I did everything I thought I could. And even so, here we are. And
Yeah.
the thing that blows my mind is Stryder was born with a birth defect. One of his testicles was fused to his abdomen. His first surgery was at 6 months old. His second surgery was at 14 months old because they pushed it back because it wasn't considered essential because of COVID. And so the reason we wanted to do the surgery was because they told us that if we didn't do the surgery and we didn't bring the testicle down to the scrotum, that the tissue could die and it could cause cancer. So I said, oh, no, 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 no. Let's do the surgeries. So we did the surgeries, and it boggles my mind because that was done in June of 2020. He was diagnosed January 2022, but it was bad. So it had been growing for who knows how long. And I had that thought in my head of, they were in there. Did they see anything and just not say anything? And then I get the thought of, is it something that I did? Is it something I was exposed to while pregnant? All of these questions, because you have those people who are like, oh, it's your fault. You did this. You caused this. It's something that you brought into your household or you gave him. And I'm like, it has nothing to do with that. I spoke with the oncologist and she's like, this is just something that you just hit the unlucky jackpot.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. It is dumb luck that these kids are diagnosed with any type of cancer, with whether it's neuroblastoma, choroid plexus carcinoma, whether it is leukemia, whether rhabdomyosarcoma, whatever. We could list them off for hours, but it is absolutely dumb luck. There is no rhyme or reason. There are very few factors or links that can be associated with it, but it's going to be case specific. You can't say, well, leukemia is caused by this, and you're only going to get it if you were exposed to this. That's just not the case. And a lot of these, parents that have their children diagnosed, they are, everything is organic. Everything is, they're homeschooled. They're not exposed to anything. They get vaccinated or they don't get vaccinated. They whatever, and it doesn't matter. They can be affected the same way that someone that eats junk food every single day, and there's someone that whatever. It's not. It doesn't matter. Any of that. None of that stuff matters. It is shitty luck. And I wish to hell that people would just listen. Stop trying to give us unsolicited advice about what we could have done, instead of actually listening to what we did do and understand that we did absolutely everything that we could, and we still feel like we failed our kids. And that's the biggest problem here, is that no matter what we do, we feel like, what the hell did we do wrong?